It's time to huddle up. I'm Garrett Seawright. This is the Daily Huddle for Thursday, September 7th. Thanks for making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. We certainly appreciate it. If you're watching on YouTube, click the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. If you're listening on the podcast, give us a 5-star review, and that will do a lot to help us get in front of more college football fans, which is always a really good thing. One singular topic today, because it's going to eat up the entire show. Caleb Williams is not coming back to USC in 2024. He will not be the Trojan quarterback next year, no matter what his dad says. If you haven't seen, Carl Williams, who is Caleb Williams' dad, gave an interview to GQ where he talked about basically the upside down process that is the NFL draft. And we'll get to his comments and we'll show and read them to you here in just a moment. But it's the entire premise is ridiculous. Carl Williams knows that his kid is going to be an NFL quarterback next year. Caleb Williams knows that that's the case. Lincoln Riley knows that's the case. Every USC fan knows that that's the truth. And every NFL fan, every NFL coach, GM, evaluator, whoever knows that that is the case as well. There's really no point to these comments. It doesn't make a lick of sense. If you haven't seen what Carl Williams said, he said the truth is that his son, can come back to school. The funky thing about the NFL draft process is he'd almost be better off not being drafted than being drafted first. The system is completely backwards. The way the system is constructed, you go to the worst possible situation, the worst possible team, the worst organization in the league, because of their desire for parity, gets the first pick. So it is the gift and the curse, end quote. Well, yeah, that's how the NFL draft process works, and that's how it's worked for a really long time. But to say that it's the worst possible situation is not always the case. You can have a situation where it very well could be the situation with Arizona, the Arizona Cardinals this year, where if Kyler Murray was going to be available to play for them the entire season, is it the worst possible situation? No. And for Caleb Williams, would going to the Arizona Cardinals be the worst possible situation? Probably not. The worst possible team? Not necessarily. The worst organization in the league? Maybe. But this idea that strictly because they're choosing number one is poppycock. The Carolina Panthers did not have the number one pick last year. They traded for the number one pick last year. The number one pick is sometimes up for grabs. And the Chicago Bears had the number one pick. Is that the worst possible situation, the worst possible team, the worst organization in the league? No. And no, you're not better off almost being not drafted than being drafted first. That is a stupid statement. It's dumb because you're going to make a lot of money being the number one overall pick. Not just in salary, but endorsements come along with that. Having the notoriety, and even if you are the biggest bust in NFL history from the number one overall pick, you're still the number one overall pick forever. You still can capitalize on that. Even if Caleb Williams goes to the NFL as the number one overall pick, which everybody expects him to be. Now, crazier things have happened, but everybody expects him to be the number one overall pick in the 2024 NFL draft. Even if he goes on to be a gigantic bust, he can still turn that into money-making opportunities. Now, the reality is, could he come back to school? In theory, but he's not going to. Caleb Williams is making a reported roughly $3 million a year on NIL that he could afford, again, in theory, to forego a season in the NFL to play for USC and get a more desirable location. The problem with that line of thinking, though, is that if you believe that the team with the first overall pick is the worst possible situation, the worst possible team, and the worst organization in the league, that doesn't change for the 2025 NFL draft. If that is your thought process, if you truly believe that being the number one overall pick puts you in a really bad situation, that doesn't change if you go back to school for another year. So if Carl Williams just wanted to come out and say, I don't want my son to play for the Arizona Cardinals, who appear to be tanking so they can draft my son, that is a wholly different conversation than saying, virtually saying, I don't want my son to be taken number 1 overall because it's going to be a bad situation for him. Wholly different topic. And that brings me to Caleb Williams, the player, and Caleb Williams, the person, because there are a lot of people who view Caleb Williams as cocky, arrogant, or just being a borderline egomaniac. You get the fingernail messages, which isn't a great look if you're not going to win. Saying, well, I don't know if I want to be in the NCAA video game because I'm not going to be paid enough. All of those things go into that, but I think it's the opposite. I don't think it's arrogance, cockiness, having an ego, hubris. I think it's insecurity. And I think you see it on display in those comments right there, because you could argue that Carl Williams is concerned about the situation that his son is going to find himself in. And I get that. But at the same time, if you thought your son was a slam dunk, can't miss, best quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck or Trevor Lawrence or John Elway, whoever the hell, if you thought that was the case, in theory, you don't care if he goes to a dumpster fire, right? Because in theory, if you believe all of those things, you believe that your son is a fire hose that's going to put the dumpster fire out. And we've seen quarterbacks have that ability. The Cincinnati Bengals were a dumpster fire before Joe Burrow got there. The Jacksonville Jaguars were a dumpster fire before Trevor Lawrence got there. It's not Justin Fields is attempting to be that dumpster fire, that fire hose for the Chicago Bears. We've seen it happen time and time again where teams are viewed as hopeless until they get the right quarterback in their situation, and then magically things go a lot better. So if you believe that your son is this great quarterback prospect, can't miss, who cares where he goes? Who cares what the organizational structure is, what the reputation is, any of those things? And I think Caleb Williams has the ability to be a fire hose, to put out a dumpster fire of an organization and turn them into a great franchise. But it reeks of insecurity when you are preoccupied with things that don't matter until 8 months from now. It reeks of insecurity, not just from the player, but from the dad. And I don't want to sit here and Colin Cowherd this thing and tell you that, there are going to be some teams that pass on Caleb Williams because of the dad. I don't think that's the case. But when you get a little bit of insight into the psyche of what built and shaped Caleb Williams, and dad is preoccupied and looks at, and Caleb Williams, it's maybe not fair to him to say that he probably thinks this too. But, he gave a quote, I think in the same article, where he said, my goal is to win 8 Super Bowls. And when they were asked why, he said, well, Tom Brady won 7. I want to win 8. There's some fire and some passion there, but then there's also the, why are you already trying to compare yourself against one of the game's greatest to ever do it, or the greatest to ever do it? I appreciate the passion and the fire that you have in that situation, but at the same time, you have plenty of time to deal with and worry about that after your college football career is over. So what does it matter after one game in what is conceivably your final season? What does it matter? There's a time and a place, and I don't know that this is a great look. Additionally, Carl Williams said that he cares about, and what played into his thinking of being the number 1 overall pick, you are better off being undrafted, which, again, is in the Hall of Fame of stupid, is the idea that that he asked Lincoln Riley, and Lincoln Riley said that Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield struggled in the NFL because of the situations that they went to, which is poppycock, balderdash, malarkey, other phrases that mean bull excrement, because it's just not true. Kyler Murray was the NFC Offensive Rookie of the Year in 2019. Baker Mayfield set the rookie record for touchdown passes. How do the things go really well in their first year, and then just that those bad organizations got to them in years 2, 3, 4, and 5? No, of course that's not what happened. Was Baker Mayfield the victim of bad coaching? Yeah. And then he got good coaching. I think Kevin Stefanski's a good coach for the Cleveland Browns. They went into Pittsburgh in a COVID year and won a playoff game. So the idea that it's the worst franchise in the league, and the only reason Baker Mayfield wasn't successful, the only reason Kyler Murray hasn't been uber successful as the organizations, is stupid. Baker Mayfield is on his 4th team in 2 years. At some point, it can't always be everybody else's fault. It can't be the Browns' fault, the Panthers' fault, the Rams' fault, and now the Buccaneers' fault that Baker Mayfield's not a franchise quarterback. That's just not how it works. It can't be that way. It can't always be everybody else's fault. Kyler Murray was the NFC Offensive Rookie of the Year. And then he got paid, and he got fat, and he got lazy playing Call of Duty all day. That's not the Arizona Cardinals' fault. That's Kyler Murray's fault. And if you are worried that a situation similar to that could be a detriment to your son, then you don't have all that much belief that your son is the player that you kind of outwardly make it seem as if you believe that. It's that simple. If you are afraid of your son going to a dumpster fire, it's because you don't believe that he's a fire hose. And that's okay. Nobody's a sure thing. But a lot of people in the NFL and in college football believe that Caleb Williams is a really, really, really high prospect, that, he could have been the number 1 overall pick if he came out this year. But he couldn't, so he wasn't. But being preoccupied with things that don't matter for a long time and then being misguided is not a good look for anybody. And I think it sucks mostly for Caleb Williams' USC teammates, who are going to answer questions this week about comments that they have nothing to do with, don't care about at all. It's just not, it's not fair, and it puts them in a really crappy situation. At the end of the day, nobody passes up being number 1 overall. It just doesn't happen. Now, there are guys that have forced their way out of who's drafting number 1 overall, and that's a different story. I don't necessarily care if Carl Williams was to come out and say, I don't want my son to play for the Arizona Cardinals. I don't care. I saw a lot of people say, if you're going to have a problem with this, you need to push back against the Mannings, when Eli Manning said, I'm not going to play for the Chargers. I don't care. I don't care that John Elway said, I don't want to play for the Colts. I don't care that Bo Jackson said, I don't want to play for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I don't care. You have that right to say, I don't want to play for you. But to come out and say, well, it might be better if he went undrafted than drafted number 1 overall is dumb. Flat out stupid. Because you can pretend like that's an option. It's not. It's not an option, because nobody passes up the guarantee of number 1 overall. Nobody's going to pass it up because of what comes with being drafted number 1 overall. And at the end of the day, I don't understand the purpose of the comments. Like, this isn't the MLB draft where you're kind of like negotiating by leverage, where you can take me number 1 overall and you can either pay me a lot of money or you can let me go back to school. That's up to you. And somebody else might get me. Either the options include for Caleb Williams in they are get taken with the number one overall pick, or tell the team that has the number one overall pick that you're not going to go there, and you're call and they have the opportunity to call your bluff. That's really it. That's where the options with the 2024 football season lie for Caleb Williams, because he can pretend as if that he's and his family can pretend as if he's going back to college if they don't get the right situation with the number one overall pick. It's not going to happen. If you believe that Carl Williams, when he says, well, in reality, if you believe that when he says, the truth is he can come back to school, I got some oceanfront property in Arizona to sell you, because it ain't happening. It's not even an option. Like, if Caleb Williams said, I'm going to go back to school, Lincoln Riley very well might just say, like, we can let you practice with the team in like a non-contact situation, but I'm not going to let you play. I'm not going to jeopardize your future. I'm not going to worry every day, week in, week out, about whether or not you're going to get hurt or not. And I'm guessing that USC probably has a succession plan already in place of like, okay, here's what we're going to do. When Caleb leaves at the end of this season, nobody passes up the opportunity to go number one. It just doesn't happen. And when that is a virtual guarantee, you don't run the risk of letting somebody come in and usurp that situation. But I just think if the knock on self-awareness goes a long way, if the knock on somebody is arrogance, hubris, cockiness, this is not the way to settle those things. This is not the way to detour people from thinking, hey, you know what? Actually, we got that one wrong. But Caleb Williams and now his family have not handled being the presumptive number one overall pick, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, and the potential quarterback of a college football playoff team the way that I'm certain NFL teams would like him to. And he'll have to answer those questions. And at some point, I just would think, I don't want to answer these questions. I don't want to have to answer these questions. So I'm going to shut up. Dad, I need you to shut up. We're just going to go out there and do our talking on the field. Because when you were that caliber of player, and make no mistake about it, he's that caliber of player, your play can do the speaking for you. And I think you should let it. But this idea that being drafted first overall is really a detriment. Woe is me. Everybody in the NFL wanted me, but only one team had that crack. It's crazy to me. And the sooner that you can flip that thinking, I think, the better. That'll do it for another week of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. We'll be back on Sunday. We'll have an entire recap of the full slate of college football, and we'll chat about all of the biggest matchups, the biggest upsets, everything to do with week 2 of the college football season when we return on Sunday. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, give us a thumbs up. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. If you're listening on a podcast, drop a 5-star review, and we'll read them here on the Daily Huddle from Saturday Glory. We'll catch you next time. See ya.